With me talking about so many shows, games, and toys from the early 2000s, there's been this giant shadow casting down on everything I talk about. One of the only franchises to exceed Pokemon in popularity, if only for one thing, Yu-Gi-Oh! The original Yu-Gi-Oh! Show and card game is what first introduced me to the G in TCG, the game. I collected Pokemon cards, but I didn't feel like reading the rules. Yu-Gi-Oh's card game, on the other hand, was the primary focus of the show. So even though all the rules were entirely correct, the cards played differently, and the characters routinely cheated, you'd still have an idea how to play the card game just by watching the show. However, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is produced by Konami, who was probably like, "Money, please! Money, please." So about 50 episodes into Yu-Gi-Oh!, the gang takes 3 episodes to play a new game, Dungeon Dice Monsters. Dungeon Dice Monsters was an attempted spin-off to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Game. It used existing Yu-Gi-Oh! Monsters in a game based on dungeons, dice, and monsters. Dungeon Dice Monsters. Where Yu-Gi-Oh! Was strictly a card game, DDM was more of a proper tabletop game. Instead of cards, the players played with monster figures, which were randomly placed in loot boxes. It's honestly an interesting concept that came out during the series' height in popularity, so I'm surprised it didn't take off. But also, the set and packs were a whole lot more expensive than the standard card game, and if you were in the target audience for Dungeon Dice, odds are you were already begging your parents for a pack of cards every time you passed the 7-Eleven. I'm surprised Dungeon Dice Monsters was the only attempt Yu-Gi-Oh! Had at a spin-off game. If you look at the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Series before it aired in the United States, the focus was really about gaming, not necessarily the Duel Monsters game itself. It wasn't until there was money able to be made from the Duel Monsters concept that it became the only focus of the show. Dungeon Dice Monsters tried to add something new to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Mix, and although it wasn't very successful, in fact they canceled most of the later sets, so one might call it very unsuccessful, it was still an interesting attempt to add something new to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Brand. So let's take a look at Yu-Gi-Oh!'s failed spin-off, Dungeon Dice Monsters. Like many, the only experience I had with Dungeon Dice Monsters were the episodes of Yu-Gi-Oh! Where they played it. I haven't watched Yu-Gi-Oh! In a long time, so I'm actually looking forward to rewatching some episodes. So, Yugi's grandfather, who owns a game shop, is upset because a new game shop has opened across the street. The gang checks it out, and it's owned by a certified, wouldn't actually be cool in real life guy, Duke Devlin. Duke Devlin is a game maker who was previously mentored by Pegasus, the creator of Duel Monsters, who was previously defeated by Yugi. Duke's all like upset and whatnot because Yugi beat his mentor, and now Pegasus isn't returning his calls for this super important business deal. Instead of just asking Yugi, a fan of games, to try out his new game, Duke surprisingly asks Joey, Yugi's friend, to play a game of Yu-Gi-Oh! With him, under the conditions that he'll act as a slave for a week if he loses. You know what, with all the leather and chains, I'm actually not surprised this is what he wanted. Daddy. So the Pharaoh, the spirit who lives in Yugi's necklace, is like, slavery is no bueno. He challenges Duke to a game of his choosing, and Duke chooses his own game, Dungeon Dice Monsters. Over 3 episodes they play it, Duke loses, and Pegasus calls him and works out a deal. The end. The best part of these episodes is when Joey and Duke open up new packs of Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards. They don't do that enough in the show. I liked watching them get excited about what they're opening, because I felt that. I have not watched Yu-Gi-Oh! In forever. I totally forgot how brutally cheesy this show is. It's tongue-in-cheek, but it's played up with so much sincerity.
Joey, no! It's a trick! Huh? It's still there!
I love it. I hate it. I'm embarrassed that my parents watched it with me. It definitely makes Dungeon Dice Monsters look interesting.
Dimension the dice! The mighty mage!
They make sure to make it look unique when compared to Duel Monsters, and at the end of the episode, everyone was like, oh gee, I sure want to play Dungeon Dice Monsters. Like, we didn't get it already. You at home, you also need to play Dungeon Dice Monsters. I wonder if Dungeon Dice Monsters was more successful if they would have played it again in the show. Like, Duke Devlin has a card that makes the game play like Dungeon Dice Monsters, but after this, it's never mentioned again. Everyone just sort of forgot to play it, I guess. Anyways, the episodes must have worked because here I am 15 years later with the Dungeon Dice Monsters starter set. Dungeon Dice Monsters is played on a 13x19 grid playmat, but I've read that the map got bigger with later expansions. In a proper Dungeon Dice Monsters game, each player would have 15 dice and a set of monsters ranging from levels 1 to 4. Each turn, the player rolls 3 dice which coincide with the level monsters that you're trying to summon. To summon a monster, you have to roll 2 summon stars of the corresponding level number. Every time you summon a monster, you also get to add on to your dungeon with a dungeon piece. However, you can only summon 10 monsters in a game, so you have at least 5 dice left over for crest rolling. Each time you roll something other than a summoning crest, you count it on your crest counter. You use these crests to do any action with your monsters, whether that's attacking, defending, moving, or using an ability. Once you all have enough monsters on the board, eventually, you'll see combat with one another. Your attack is determined by your monster's attack, opponent's defense, and the defending monster's HP. To win the game, you have to make your way all the way over to the opponent's side of the board and attack their monster lord. And I quote, "The monster lord is you! You hit the monster lord 3 times and you win." So unfortunately, the best way I got to experience Dungeon Dice Monsters was through the Game Boy Advance game, which basically drains the game of all social interaction, which is really the heart and soul of any tabletop game. I found it to be very slow. Every action you make is based on having the right number of crests built up, so tons of turns will go by before you're capable of making any move. When you are making a move, the game seems pretty basic. It's really just who can attack first. With so much time being spent on building up move counters, it's not hard to perfectly plan out an attack or have time to anticipate what the opponent is going to do. Oh look, Karibo, one of the weakest monsters in the game, against my perfectly ultimate Great Moth, a certified big boy. Yeah, that's what I thought. I do think the game has a lot of interesting things about it, like the movable map, dice, and crests, and even the card effects. But unfortunately, the game didn't have a lot of time to develop to be more complex. In a way, I wish it had, because I love the concept of a trading figure game. But it may be too expensive of a concept to properly get off the ground. In the United States, Dungeon Dice Monsters' final few planned sets were actually cancelled. It did go on in Japan for a little bit longer, but not much longer. Nonetheless, I had fun messing around with it. I've been wanting to get back into Yu-Gi-Oh! For a little bit, but I can't because what even is this? What made me remember Dungeon Dice Monsters at all was a Dice Masters expansion with Yu-Gi-Oh! Theming. With tabletop games becoming more and more popular nowadays, it's inevitable that Yu-Gi-Oh! Will eventually take another attempt at a tabletop game. Maybe not Dungeon Dice Monsters, but maybe something similar. I think Duel Links showed that people are still interested in Yu-Gi-Oh! The only problem is the newest incarnation of the game is way too unfriendly to those who haven't played it since it came out, and people who want to be newly introduced into the game. Maybe I'll try to get back into Yu-Gi-Oh! One day, maybe to coincide with me looking at every single Yu-Gi-Oh! Season, but maybe not. Until then, I'm going to pretend like Yu-Gi-Oh! Never changed by continuing to ignore it. Thank you to Audible for sponsoring this video. Go to audible.com/Billiam or text Billiam to 500-500 to get a 30-day free trial and a free audiobook from Audible. I spend so much time watching shows or playing video games for this channel that the best way for me to consume media for pleasure is with audio content. While I'm driving, at the gym, or on campus, if I have my headphones in, I'm usually listening to an audiobook. Luckily, Audible has a massive selection of audiobooks and audio content, including Audible originals, which include fitness shows, theatrical performances, and exclusive audiobook readings. By signing up for Audible using audible.com/Billiam, you get 1 free audiobook a month regardless of price and 2 Audible originals. The best part about Audible is you own any of the audiobooks you get through the service, even if your subscription ends. You can listen to your audiobook selection through the Audible app, which is available on a wide selection of devices. You can pause it on one and pick up where you left off on another. Recently, I've been in a creative biography kick. I started re-listening to one of my favorite audiobooks, A Life in Parts by Bryan Cranston. If you are a creative type or just like good storytelling, this autobiography is essential. It's a humble and fascinating account of Bryan Cranston's entire career, from Malcolm in the Middle to Breaking Bad, along with how his personal life has affected his philosophy on acting and collaboration. I've set up a book club on my Discord, and the first book we're going to listen to together is A Life in Parts by Bryan Cranston. And the best way to get it is through Audible. So go to audible.com/Billiam or text Billiam to 500-500 to get a 30-day free trial and a free audiobook. Thank you again to Audible for sponsoring this video. Anyways, thank you for watching this video. If this is your first video of mine, please consider subscribing and also following me on both Instagram and Twitter, where I post updates and explain kind of what I'm doing when I'm not making videos. Also, I wanted to apologize if I sound off. I am incredibly sick, and I didn't feel like setting up my whole tripod shebang today, so I am getting all of my energy out into the world right now by making this video, and then I'm gonna go sleep all weekend. So anyways, thank you for watching. I'll see you next week.